But I think the encouragement to us is the same as it was to Timothy, to remember and to not be afraid. And I think it's particularly interesting that Paul asked Timothy to remember his mom and his grandma. Strong, I imagine, Jewish women, Lois and Eunice. And maybe for a moment I invite you to think of your own parents, or to think of your own moms. I think there's something about moms in particular that maybe we need to channel now. And certainly there have been many amazing men and fathers here at FCBC. But for a moment, I invite you to think about your own mom and your own grandma, as I think about my mom, who's here, and my grandmas. I imagine that Lois and Eunice, as Jewish women growing up in a world that is westernizing, Romanizing, in a world that is oppressed by Greece and Rome increasingly, for people whose Jewish identity is slowly slipping away, such that Eunice, Timothy's mom, right, married a Greek, and we already see that this family is assimilating, perhaps losing or changing, evolving what it means for them to be Jewish. And not so differently, I imagine many of our families or our moms who may have been immigrants, or our grandmothers who were immigrants who came from China or wherever, and had to redefine for themselves what it meant to be Chinese American, or to be Chinese, or to be Asian, and to come to a place that maybe didn't welcome them. And to think of our church, founded in 1880, at a time where we weren't allowed to intermarry legally, where 2 years later, people who looked like us were systematically and legally excluded from entering this country. To think about our grandmothers, great-grandmothers, and mothers who had to carry the trauma of immigration, literally being uprooted from their home, obviously, yeah, with the hope of greater opportunity, with the hope of greater prosperity, but nonetheless uprooting themselves from the networks, supports, from the land that defined them for the greater part of their lives, into this random place called America, where they were forced into this ghetto called Chinatown. That to me is inherently traumatic. And I think about my mom and my grandparents, and I think that even though I think they carried it in ways that were oftentimes difficult and sad, are some of the strongest people that I've ever seen. And often at cost to themselves, at cost to their own bodies, their own mental health, their own emotional health. Seeing strong women carry the entire family and carry the trauma of their whole family. And often men who didn't know how to deal with that, and often men who would take that out violently or silently, and women who had to carry that for the whole family. And I imagine that Timothy's parents, or Timothy's mother and his grandmother, weren't so different. Sometimes as I was thinking about this, I thought about my mom, and I remember just when we were younger, or when my sister was really little, I remember riding in the car with my mom, and Alex must have been 1 or 2, and I was sitting in the front seat with my mom. And I don't remember any specifics, but Alex was being really annoying and just whining or asking for something. And all I remember thinking was how annoyed I was and how calm my mom was, and just thinking oh my God, my mom is the most patient woman in the world. Because if I was in her spot, I would have just stopped the car and thrown Alex out of the window. I was really annoyed. But and that's come up at so many different times, just thinking my mom is the most patient woman in the world. I don't know how she does it. And I still don't understand it, and I still think it's something that I've taken for granted, and wondered kind of at what cost, And so I think when Paul invites Timothy to remember his mom and his grandma and to think of the inheritance he has from them, I think Paul is inviting Timothy to channel that strength and that patience, that endurance. And I think for a lot of us, that's the inheritance we have from our parents and our moms too. And also, it's an opportunity for us to learn from them. To say we don't have to do it the exact same way that our moms did it. Like, we stand on such a rich historical legacy of women in our families, but also in our church too. Obviously, like, Dr. Chuck is kind of the figurehead for a lot of us, but I think about all the women who make this place go. I don't even know about like Ashley Peterson, or even, I was reading some of the plaques at Redwood Glen, and Donaldina Cameron gets a shout there, and like, I don't know all the women who made this place what it is, but I even think about the women in our 10 o'clock. I think about Auntie Carol or Auntie Eva. I think about, all the love that was sown into this place. But I also think, these women, I also think there's an invitation to channel that spirit, but also to say, like, I think our moms like took a lot of crap, and I also think that there's an invitation for us to learn and say we don't actually have to take all the crap too. We can learn and be healthy as well. But I think what's grown increasingly important for me is to think about FCBC and our rich history here of men and women who have sown into this place. And I think given where we're at in the world right now, given what's happening in Chinatown, given what's happening in San Francisco, given what's happening in Charlottesville, in the whole nation, given the place that we're at, if we don't channel, if we don't reach back into our history, we have no idea what our voice means in these current events and in the things that are going on in the world right now. And we sell ourselves short. We take the easy route from not engaging on the issues of immigration, refugee folks, racism, all these things, affirmative action. All of these things have a latch point onto our history and our story as Chinese Americans who had to come up here in really, really difficult times. Like, we have something really powerful to say. Our church does. And yet, if we forsake our history, we have no idea what this church means in Chinatown or with these kind of issues and events. More particularly, what I mean is that, and this is where I see our connection to things like Charlottesville, is like where the Ku Klux Klan is marching in the past few days, trying to reclaim a place of white supremacy and white power, is that those forces exist here at FCBC in the ways that we bought into a gospel and music and theology and ways of doing church that were never ours in the first place, and that never fit who we were. And so I guess what I'm saying is that there is a Chinatown theology, there's a Chinatown way of doing church, there is a Chinese American way of knowing and following Jesus that we haven't tapped into at all. And if we honor our ancestors, and if we channel Dr. Chuck, and channel Ashley Peterson, or channel Auntie Carol and Auntie Eva, and all the people who have gone before us, who came up, and Uncle Victor and Auntie Mulaney, and all the original gangsters who came up in these really difficult times, in the 40s and 50s, in times of segregation or legalized exclusion, we can step into a prophetic present, a prophetic space in Chinatown and the world, and to reclaim a God or a way of doing Christianity that is more honest and loving to who we are. And that's a big reason why I'm going to divinity school. That's a big reason why I want to go farther in my theological education, is because I believe that there's something better and healthier and more loving for us and communities like ours. Communities of people of color and minorities and women who have yet to see a theology and a gospel that honors them in their full personhood. because what we've taken instead, and bless the missionaries who planted our churches, and bless the God-loving Westerners who came and thought of folks like us in the Chinatowns and in the ghettos and in China and wherever. But they gave us, and they did the best they could, but they gave us a gospel that came from their story and not from ours. And so I would love to see people from our congregation write music, to write our worship songs or to write our hymns. I would love to see people from our congregation or from Chinatown write the next theology books. I would love to see people from this congregation to say, this is what God looks like to me because I grew up in Chinatown. And me and Pastor Wiesel have had conversations about this, about his family. And we all have a different story, and that's what makes the kingdom of God so rich and so beautiful. And I still don't think I fully appreciate this place, but I couldn't appreciate it more until I left, until I spent time in the Black church or the Korean church. I didn't understand what this meant, because I think especially spending time in the Black church, I realized that the way that Black folks worship God comes out of a very specific story and a very specific history. Because they weren't allowed to worship with white people, essentially. They had to come up with their own music. They had to come up with their own theology. Because they weren't allowed to go to the seminaries, and they weren't allowed to worship with Dominic. And so worshiping in Black spaces, I think I realized, like, oh, there's a story that comes, we have a story too. And yet, our Christianity hasn't developed into its own unique thing. And you know, that's just what it is, right? That's just part of our story too, is that we had more ways of assimilating, we had more access to assimilate than Black churches did. But it wasn't until I spent time outside of this church that I really learned to love and appreciate what we had for what it is, our history, our rich historical legacy, and all the people that make that up. So,